Hi Bill, I'm just going to talk to you now about conditional activities and how to make them work. So first of all, just look at the screen here and you can see this is the teacher's view. Here we have two activities which have been configured for conditional access and completion. So the second activity here is this is the scatter activity, and the student doesn't have access to this activity until they have completed the flashcards activity. And because we've got that on the teacher's view, we can actually see the activity with a message here saying that it is restricted. But in actual fact, the student cannot see this. So if we go to switch role to student, what will happen is that right. In general, the student won't be able to see that scatter activity until they have completed the flashcards. In actual fact, in testing this, I completed the flashcards activity so that I could show you some things. But I'll show you shortly. We'll make this 3-3 scatter here disappear because it will make it dependent on the previous activity, the flashcards activity. The activity that you make it dependent on for showing doesn't need to be the previous activity. It would be possible to have flashcards scatter, and then only the quiz be dependent on these other activities being complete. Right. All right, let me just show you then some stuff about this. So, for example, we've made this flashcards activity here dependent, made this scatter activity dependent on the flashcards activity. And we do this by requiring that the user spends at least 180 seconds on the flashcards activity page. This is something that we added into our Quizlet activity that's not part of standard Moodle. So if we go to the settings for the Quizlet import module, which is here, we can see we actually have the default minimum time per activity. So you can actually change that. So if it may now be 180, but if you wish, you could make that 120 or 60 or 50. That would be fine. And here we have the default completion settings. So if you want the activity to show that it's now complete and 120 seconds or 60 seconds have passed, you would leave this completion label here as yes. If you want to show the countdown to completion, you would leave this as yes, so show a countdown timer. In actual fact, I think we actually need to enable this on each individual activity, so these defaults may not apply. I mean, let's go now and do it. So we'll turn on editing, and we will actually make this one here 3-3 flashcards. We'll make this dependent on 3-2 scatter. Okay, so the first thing is we edit it. And we want to restrict access to this until 3-2 scatter has been completed. So here we have the activity completion condition, which is going to be what we use to determine whether we have access to this this activity. And then we have 3-2 scatter, which is the previous activity. We have that we put that must be marked as complete. So now, I'll just do this now. Let's go back to our course. We'll see that the flashcards here is grayed out because it's now dependent on scatter. And in fact, if we switch our role to student, you'll see that the flashcards disappears because they can't see activities which they can not yet enter. That's actually a setting that we can adjust. We can make it so that they can see the activity. It's just grey like it is for the teacher, and they can't get in there until they've done the previous activity. Now let's go back then, and we've lost edit mode, so let's turn editing mode on again. Now you'll notice here that we've got these little marks here, these check boxes, and what they indicate is whether or not the activity has been completed or not. So if activity completion has not been set up for a particular activity, it won't show up in that little list that we saw of options for restricting access, and you won't get that little checkbox indicating whether or not the activity has been completed. So let's set up this 3.3 flashcards for completion. Edit it. Edit settings. This will mean that the next activity, the next scatter activity, 3.3 scatter, we can now choose to make that dependent on 3.3 flashcards. So we can see we're chaining, making a chain of dependent activities. It isn't necessary to chain it one by one. You could actually chain like have 4 Quizlet or flashcards that are available, but only the quiz is dependent, and then make the next 4 flashcards and scatters dependent on that previous quiz being completed. That's quite possible. Anyway, so before we did this restrict access and we set it to the previous activity 3.2 scatter. So now let's set up this one for activity completion. So the default is that the activity completion is not on. We turn that on and we put show activity as complete when conditions are met. And the conditions that we are going to set are require view. And because of our special kind of minimum time setting, this require view won't kick in until the student has in fact been on the activity for 120 seconds or so. Okay. And just on while we're doing this, we did see before that we could show a countdown till completion or just show a label when the activity has been completed, and that setting is here. In fact, those defaults only apply for when the activity is created, and they haven't been applied here. So if we wanted to show a countdown to when the activity is complete, or a label just saying it's complete, then we would turn this on or turn it off. Okay, let's just turn it on. Okay. Now let's see what happens when we go back to our course. Okay, so you can see now that flashcards now also has this little checkbox here to indicate that this activity has not been completed yet. Okay, so that's basically how it works. Let's have a look at the role of student then, and I'll tell you what. So here we have the scatter. Let's set the minimum time for the scatter and flashcards very low, just so that we can see it working. So the minimum time for flashcards, let's make this 10 seconds. The minimum time for scatter, let's also make this 10 seconds. Okay, so that way it'll show up pretty quickly. Great. And then let's switch our role to student so we can try it out as a student. Okay, and you can see that flashcards here has been complete, but this scatter has not been complete. Okay, and the next flashcards, which is dependent on this scatter, is actually not showing at all. All right, so 3.3 flashcards is not there. Let's make a note of that. Let's go into the scatter. Start the game. Now we'll actually have this completed in 10 seconds. So we haven't indicated on this activity that 10 seconds has passed. So even if we don't, complete the activity, we're probably done now, aren't we? Okay. So let's move things around. Okay, so assuming we had actually completed the activity, let's go back to our course. Okay, and you can see that the flashcards has now shown up because we've been on that activity for 10 seconds. And it's checked here that scatter activity has been completed. Now this flashcards activity here, we actually set this with to show the countdown timer and to show when this activity was complete. So let's just go and have a look at that now, so you'll see what I mean by that. Flashcards. Okay. And you can see we already lost a bit of time in the loading of things. Okay, and the activity is now complete. We're done. All right. But if we set that at 180 seconds, that would take 180 seconds before they would be allowed to go on to the next activity. So I think you probably will think that that's a little bit confusing because it is a bit of a head spin when you first do it. But if you go and check those key settings, which I'll just run over again so you know what I'm talking about. The key settings. Are these, the restrict access and the activity completion right at the bottom of the settings. Okay, you want to set up a chain of activities. You can make them dependent on the previous activity or on the previous quiz, which may be a better way of doing things. Here, first set the activity completion condition to an activity which has actually had activity completion enabled. And to enable the activity completion for an activity, on this section here, you put show activity as complete when conditions are met, and you set the condition as require view. And when the activity is not yet available, the default behavior is for that activity to be completely invisible. Okay, so as a teacher you can see it, but as a student you can't see it at all. It is possible to actually set that up so that the student can see it. They just see a grayed out kind of explanation saying they can't actually access this activity yet. And that happens here. While access is prevented, hide activity entirely in the course and gradebook, we would change that to show activity grayed out with restriction information. And when you do that, then when the activity is not available, they will still actually see the activity, but they just won't be able to access it, and it will be grayed out and look just like this: restricted, not available until the activity Nantuka is marked complete. Okay. Now I think, as I said, it's probably a bit confusing, but that's, if you just go through and try it yourself, you'll probably know better what I'm talking about, and you might have some questions, but then come and ask